Now, I think it's safe to say that out of every detective in both the original Dexter series and its spin-off, Frank Lundy stood out as the best by far, which got me thinking, what if we pulled him out of Miami and dropped him into another show entirely? More specifically, how would he handle the impossible task of tracking down the infamous Fox River 8 from Prison Break? In today's video, we'll be ranking FBI Special Agent Frank Lundy's ability to hunt these escaped convicts, and why the results might be far more unexpected than you'd imagine. To start, I'm going to go over the tier list I made for this video. All the way at the bottom, I have the convicts who would not stand a chance whatsoever against Lundy, meaning they get caught with sheer ease and he hardly needs to break a sweat. Right above is those who I think would be an easy catch for him, giving him a slightly harder time, but in the end being pretty easy for Lundy to track down and book them right back to prison. Coming in at the middle is the ones who would be relatively difficult for Lundy to catch, but at the end of the day they would be ranked in the middle tier of difficulty in terms of how hard it is for him to track them down. Second to top is those who would end up being an extremely close call for Lundy, meaning just as hope is lost and the convicts think they've outdone Special Agent Frank Lundy, they leave the smallest clue behind that leads him to find out where they are and get them sent right back to jail. And coming in at the very top is the individuals who would completely escape from Frank Lundy's hands, living the rest of their life free but also on the run, with Lundy being successfully defeated in the end. Now without further ado, let's get into our first convict from the Fox River 8, David Apolskis, aka Tweener.
If I land with you, Cuzzo?
Roll, Snowflake.
Hey, man, I'm just new, you know, I'm looking for some homies.
I said roll.
Now, Tweener was one of those beloved characters from the first few seasons of Prison Break who started out as a rat but ended up being an actually decent guy who found himself at the wrong time at the wrong place. In terms of his physicality, there's nothing out of the ordinary, but he does have some decent muscle mass. However, the thing that brings him down the most is his lack of overall intelligence and his ability to think on the spot. This is why I'm going to have to rank Tweener at easy catch, and here's why. Frank Lundy has probably faced much harder cases such as infamous serial killers than a wannabe gangster on the run. I feel like Tweener would end up miscalculating and slipping up like we saw in Prison Break, which would undoubtedly lead to his demise. However, I would not go as far as placing him at the very bottom because he's not the dumbest person on this list and has some common sense to a certain extent. But when it comes to facing Frank Lundy, it's really hard to put him any higher than where he is without insulting his intelligence. Next up, we have one of the smartest but also incredibly disabled people in the Fox River 8, Haywire.
Holland. I'm gonna live in a windmill. All we need is a raft.
The reason why I say this is because, as we know, he's got the remarkable ability of being able to identify patterns and his photographic memory that retains pretty much anything he desires. However, this comes with him being a bit crazy and not having any self-control to make a sensual plan to allow him to escape. This is why I'm going to have to place poor Haywire all the way at the bottom, no chance. Like we saw in the show, after the Fox River 8 escape, Haywire is kicked out of the group due to his unpredictability, which results in a downward spiral until he's finally caught. He's so lost in his mind that he thinks he can travel to Holland via a homemade boat that, put simply, is not enough to even cross a lake. Besides that, he acts with impulse and doesn't take into consideration the trail he leaves behind or the actions he does. Now for Frank Lundy, this is more than easy and would not cost him a sweat in terms of finding out where he is and what he's been up to. So unfortunately, Haywire would be packed up within a day at most, leaving Frank Lundy time to enjoy his famous cucumber sandwiches before he tracks down his next target. Now, one of the most family-oriented men on this list is none other than C-Note.
You know what, man? I can have tea with the Grand Wizard of the KKK if I want. And I still get my money. You got that, little boy?
No, we don't got that.
In the show, his character comes from a rather rough upbringing, residing in gang-stricken neighborhoods where one needs to watch his back at all times. Other than his decent muscle mass, C-Note does have some intelligence, but not notably more than others out of the Fox River 8. This is why I would have to put him at tough capture, and here's why. Like we saw in the show, C-Note does have outside connections such as his gang affiliations that would give him a decent head start on Lundy. However, like many of you could have guessed, his biggest weakness by far is his family. His whole reasoning for escaping was essentially to see his family again, and like we saw, he was willing to do anything to be with them. Now, assuming he's able to get his daughter and wife safely in a vehicle going across the country, like we saw in the show, he would eventually need to make a stop at a hospital due to his daughter's condition, which requires medical attention. After a while of being on the run, Lundy would get alerted that he's in a particular state, which would lead him one way or another to his exact whereabouts due to C-Note leaving a trail behind him. In the end, he would be caught and sentenced back to prison, but it's not to say he didn't go down without a fight. Up next is one of the most iconic villains from Prison Break, aka Theodore Bagwell.
Not that hot! When this guy woke up this morning, he was white!
Now, T-Bag is arguably one of the most evil characters on this list and is what would actually give him a fair advantage when facing Lundy. Although his physique is rather lackluster, he does show some critical thinking skills and also the ability to do what you gotta do in the heat of the moment to survive. This is why I would have to place T-Bag at close call. Now, although by the end of the show he does end up getting caught, within the first few seasons or so, we get to see just how dedicated and sneaky he is to not going back to prison. After all, he has a horrible traumatic past and basically no family or friends, which puts him at the advantage of being completely selfish for himself and not having any strings or burdens pinning him down. I mean, hell, the guy lost his hand and somehow still ended up outperforming others who were at their physical peak. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, Frank Lundy has an incredible amount of experience when it comes to tracking down the worst of the worst, and I do think that eventually T-Bag would slip up and be finally caught by him. After all, he does have his moments where he gets a little too crazy and doesn't think about how his actions tie a trail to his whereabouts, leading Lundy to snuff out where he really is and send him back to where he came from. Next up, we have none other than John Abruzzi, who was once the guy who essentially had the most connections in all of Fox River.
Yummy.
Now, it's important to remember that one of his biggest advantages on the outside world is his mob connections, which could theoretically allow him to flee the country faster than anybody else. This is why I would have to put Abruzzi in tough capture, and here's why. Although John isn't necessarily strong in terms of physicality, he is in regard to his team and the overall mob he has behind him. We know that his connections are willing to help him out quite a lot and even have the expenses to do so. Like we saw in Prison Break, Abruzzi was able to set up a location for a plane to take the Fox River Raid out of the country, but unfortunately things went south and the plane ended up taking slightly earlier than it was supposed to. However, let's imagine a world where Abruzzi was able to get on that plane or somehow get further on his own. He would cause some trouble towards Lundy's ability to find him, but like we saw in the show, his pride sometimes gets the best of him, and I do think he would eventually slip given he isn't some genius like Scofield that thinks about every single scenario. Thus, he would not be an easy catch for Lundy, but also not one to cause him too much trouble, fitting him perfectly in that mid-tier. Now, next up, we have a really interesting character who played a major role in Prison Break, Lincoln Burrows.
Why you want to see Burrows so bad anyhow?
Because he's my brother.
For the sake of this video, let's imagine that he's side by side with the Michael Scofield, since that's essentially how it played out in the show. Besides his genius brother, Burrows does have some significant physical abilities, oftentimes being considered the brute force within the duo. He is somewhat intelligent, but certainly nowhere near as smart as Scofield. This is why I'm going to have to place Lincoln at close call, and here's why. Burrows, like we've seen time and time again, is able to stick to the plan and work quite well sometimes with his brother to avoid law enforcement. However, I believe he wouldn't quote-unquote escape solely because I think he would end up sacrificing himself so his brother can live on. Imagine a scenario where Lundy is about to catch both of them and Lincoln throws himself onto Lundy, or hell causes a scenario which allows Scofield to get away. I think this is exactly how it would go down, considering that Lincoln at the end of the day is a good family man who has that power within him to sacrifice himself so others can be free. After all, Scofield did essentially give his life away to save him from the electric chair. And speaking of brothers, how could anyone forget the iconic Michael Scofield?
Oh, that kid's clever. It's not a place. It's a name.
Michael is by far the most intelligent person on this list and arguably one of television's most brilliant minds. Without a doubt, I would have to place him all the way at the very top. They escape. I mean, come on, if anyone on this list could do it, it would most definitely be Michael Scofield. Now, some might argue that he does have a pretty significant weakness in regards to his need to put others in front of him, but let's not forget, he has escaped multiple prison facilities, and I'm talking the worst of the worst. In season 1, we see just how much he plans in advance, not only mapping out out the prison escape, but also everything he would have to do on the outside. Scofield is the type of guy who thinks 10 steps in advance, and even made a fool out of Mahone, who's arguably on par with Frank Lundy. Now, I don't want to insult Special Agent Lundy's intelligence, but Scofield is honestly on a whole other level. Sure, he would have some struggle getting Lundy off his back, but at the end of the day, Scofield is the guy who comes out on top. Whether it's cleaning his tracks, faking his death, or hell, coming face to face with the guy who's chasing him, time and time again, he proves to be one of a kind and would escape one way or another in the end. Now, how could we forget about one of the most loyal guys on this list, Fernando Sucre?
And Van Gogh over there is my new cellmate.
But you're gonna do something about it, right? You're gonna get rid of him.
I'll do what's necessary.
You're my boy.
This man could literally be the definition of loyalty when it came to his brother-like relationship with Scofield. Not only that, he does show signs of strength in terms of his physical abilities, and also has one of the strongest moral compasses on this list, as a man of faith and family. This is why I'm going to have to play Sucre at close call. Now, in Prison Break, Sucre actually got quite far in terms of avoiding the police, which is partially due to the fact that he stuck around Scofield. This is what undoubtedly boosts him far up in the list, but unfortunately doesn't mean he would escape. One of his biggest weaknesses is his undying love for Maria Cruz and his baby. As we saw, he can hardly resist leaving them behind because that's the whole reason why he escaped in the first place. I unfortunately think that after some time, he would find himself going to look for her, in which Lundy would be waiting to strike. Sure, hanging around Scofield could get him off the FBI's radar for quite some time, but eventually his urges would give in and he would go back to his family, which in turn would get him sent back to prison for a long time. It's important to remember that I rank these guys mostly based on my personal opinion, and I definitely do think there's room to argue as to where some of them are supposed to be. If you want to dive even deeper into these topics with exclusive videos, guaranteed replies, and your name featured at the end of every upload, you can become a channel member for just $2.99. It helps out a ton and keeps this content going. Don't forget to like and subscribe and drop your own thoughts on this tier list in the comments down below. And if you want to keep the conversation going, hop into the Discord where we talk about all your favorite TV shows and media. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.